Parents gave her everything, told me to survive alone, but I came back stronger than ever in the affluent suburb of Westfield, Connecticut. The Morrison family lived in a pristine colonial house with manicured lawns and a white picket fence that seemed to promise the American dream. But behind those perfect walls, a different story was unfolding, one of favoritism so stark it would shape two sisters' destinies forever. Sarah Morrison, 18 years old with golden hair, and her mother's blue eyes had always been the sun around which the family orbited. Every room she entered seemed to brighten, not because of any inherent radiance, but because her parents, Robert and Margaret Morrison, had decided long ago that she was their masterpiece, their investment, their future. Meanwhile, Emma Morrison, just 16, had learned to live in the shadows of her own home. Dark-haired and quiet, she possessed a sharp intelligence that went unnoticed and a strength that would remain untested until the day everything changed, the morning that would alter Emma's life forever. Began like any other. Margaret Morrison sat at the kitchen island, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of imported coffee, reviewing Sarah's college acceptance letters. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, the envelopes were spread across the marble countertop like trophies. Sarah deserves the best, Margaret murmured to herself, the same mantra she'd repeated for years. The family's financial resources, considerable as they were from Robert's successful law practice, would flow entirely towards Sarah's education and future. Emma, finishing her breakfast in silence, had grown accustomed to being a footnote in conversations about the family's future. Robert Morrison entered the kitchen, his tailored suit impeccable, his expression carrying the weight of a decision that had been months in the making. The economic downturn had hit his firm harder than he'd let on, and the family savings, once substantial, were now stretched thin. But rather than scale back Sarah's plans, he had made a different choice entirely. The conversation that followed would echo in Emma's mind for years to come. Her parents spoke about Sarah's bright future, about sacrifices that needed to be made, about tough decisions in difficult times. They spoke around Emma as if she were invisible, discussing her fate without once meeting her eyes. The words came like a physical blow. Emma would not be continuing her education. At 16, she was old enough to work, old enough to contribute to the household, old enough to understand that sometimes families had to make difficult choices. The resources would go to Sarah, who had potential, who had opportunities, who had everything Emma apparently lacked. But the cruelest twist was yet to come. Not only would Emma's education end, but she would also need to leave home. Sarah needed her own space, her own room to prepare for college, her own environment free from distractions. The house, they explained with the casual cruelty of people who had convinced themselves they were being practical, wasn't big enough for both girls to thrive. Emma's belongings fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. 16 years of life reduced to what she could carry. Her parents had found her a small efficiency apartment in a rougher part of town, and Robert had secured her a job at a local diner through a client connection. They spoke of it as if they were doing her a favor, as if they were teaching her independence and self-reliance. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as Emma loaded her meager possessions into the back of Robert's sedan. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Emma saw something flicker across her sister's face, guilt, perhaps, or recognition of the profound injustice unfolding. But Sarah turned away, returning to her college preparation books, and the moment passed. The drive to Emma's new apartment was conducted in silence. Robert carried her bags to the door of the small, shabby building, handed her a month's rent, and left her with words that would fuel her determination for years to come. "This is your chance to prove what you're made of. Don't disappoint us." Standing alone in the dim hallway, key in hand, Emma felt the weight of abandonment settle over her like a heavy coat. At 16, she was truly alone in the world, discarded by the people who should have protected her, cast aside for the sake of a golden child who had never wanted for anything. But in that moment of complete desolation, something awakened in Emma Morrison, a fierce determination that would carry her through the darkest days ahead. She would not just survive, she would prove them wrong about everything they thought they knew about strength, about worth, about family. The efficiency. Apartment was barely larger than Sarah's walk-in closet back home. A single room with a kitchenette, a Murphy bed, and a window that looked out onto a fire escape. The radiator clanked through the night and the neighbors were loud, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, Emma had a space that belonged entirely to her. The job at Murphy's Diner was grueling. 6-day weeks, double shifts when she could get them, dealing with demanding customers and a manager who saw her as just another disposable teenager. Her hands became rough from washing dishes and cleaning tables. Her back ached from long hours on her feet, but she never complained. Every dollar earned was a step toward something better. Every shift completed was proof of her resilience. Sarah attended debutante balls and college preparation courses. Emma was learning different lessons. She discovered that she had a natural ability to connect with people, to remember their stories and their orders, to provide comfort in the simple act of serving a warm meal. The regular customers began to request her section, and her tips slowly but steadily increased. But the real education was happening in the quiet hours of the night, when Emma would study at the small table in her apartment. She had salvaged her textbooks before leaving home, and she continued her education alone, driven by a hunger that her parents had never recognized. The local library became her sanctuary, and she devoured books on business, finance, and economics with the same intensity others might reserve for survival guides. Months passed, and Emma began to establish a routine, a life. She learned to navigate the city's public transportation, to stretch a dollar further than seemed possible, to find strength in solitude. Her parents never called. Sarah's social media showed a constant stream of parties, shopping trips, and college visits, a life of privilege that now seemed to belong to a different world entirely. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. The scared, abandoned 16-year-old was evolving into someone harder, more focused, more determined. Emma was learning that survival wasn't just about getting by, it was about laying the foundation for something greater. 7 years had passed since that devastating day when Emma Morrison learned what her family truly valued. 7 years of grinding work, relentless study, and an unwavering focus on a future that seemed impossible from the confines of that small efficiency apartment. The transformation had been remarkable. Emma, now 23, had not only survived but thrived in ways that defied every expectation her parents had held about her potential. The scared teenager who had been cast aside had evolved into a formidable young woman with sharp business instincts and an unshakable determination. Her journey had taken her from the diner to night school, from night school to community college, and from community college to a full scholarship at a prestigious university. While working 3 jobs to support herself, she had earned degrees in business administration and finance, graduating summa cum laude with a thesis on economic recovery that had caught the attention of several major firms. But Emma's real education had come from the streets, from the customers at Murphy's Diner, from the late-night conversations with fellow students who, like her, were fighting for every opportunity. She had learned to read people, to identify opportunities others missed, to turn adversity into advantage. The breakthrough had come during her senior year of college. While researching her thesis, Emma had identified a pattern in the real estate market that others had overlooked. Properties in transitioning neighborhoods were being undervalued, and she saw an opportunity that required not just capital, but vision and timing. Using her savings from years of relentless work, Emma made her first investment, a small apartment building in a neighborhood that was beginning to show signs of revitalization. She personally oversaw the renovations, working weekends and evenings to restore the property to its former glory. When she sold it 18 months later, the profit was substantial enough to fund her next venture, From there, Emma's business acumen blossomed. She developed a reputation for seeing potential where others saw only problems. Her investment company, Morrison Holdings, began to attract attention from clients who valued her unique perspective and proven track record. She had an uncanny ability to identify opportunities in distressed properties and undervalued markets. The irony was not lost on her that she had taken the Morrison name, the same name that had been used to justify her abandonment, and made it synonymous with success and integrity in the business world. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had followed a different trajectory. Despite all the resources invested in her education, she had struggled to find her place in the world. Harvard had been challenging, and without the work ethic that Emma had developed through necessity, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the academic demands. She had changed majors 3 times, extended her studies, and ultimately graduated with mediocre grades and no clear direction. Robert Morrison's law firm had indeed struggled during the economic downturn, more severely than he had ever admitted. To his family, the decision to invest everything in Sarah's education had been based on the assumption that she would quickly establish herself in a lucrative career and help stabilize the family's finances. Instead, Sarah had moved back home after graduation, uncertain about her future and dependent on parents who were themselves facing financial difficulties. Margaret Morrison, who had once spoken so confidently about Sarah's bright future, now found herself making excuses for her daughter's lack of direction. The perfect life they had constructed was showing cracks, and the golden child was losing her luster. It was during this time of uncertainty for the Morrison family that Emma made her decision to return to Westfield. Not as the broken teenager who had been discarded, but as a successful businesswoman with the means to purchase the very symbols of the privilege that had once been denied to her. The house next door to her childhood home had come on the market. It was larger than the Morrison family home, more elegant, with better views and more sophisticated architectural details. Emma's acquisition of the property sent ripples through the exclusive neighborhood, and it wasn't long before word reached her family about their new neighbor. Emma's return to Westfield was strategic and deliberate. She had spent years building not just wealth, but a reputation. She was known in business circles as someone who was fair but tough, who honored her commitments but expected the same from others. She had learned the value of patience, of timing, and of never revealing her hand too early. The first encounter happened at the local market where Margaret Morrison had shopped for decades. Emma was selecting produce when she noticed a familiar figure in the next aisle. Her mother looked older, more tired, wearing clothes that Emma recognized as several seasons old, unusual for someone who had once prided herself on always wearing the latest fashions. Their eyes met across the display of organic vegetables, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Margaret's face cycled through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, recognition, and finally, something that might have been shame. Emma simply nodded, a polite acknowledgement between neighbors, and continued her shopping. But the message was clear. Emma Morrison had returned, and she was no longer the vulnerable girl who could be discarded when convenient. The transformation in the family dynamic was immediate and profound. Sarah, now 25 and still living at home, found herself face to face with the sister she had allowed to be sacrificed for her benefit. The contrast between their lives was stark and undeniable. While Sarah struggled with direction and purpose, Emma had built an empire from nothing. Robert Morrison, whose legal practice was now struggling to maintain the lifestyle the family had once enjoyed, found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching his discarded daughter succeed beyond his wildest expectations. The practical, cold logic he had used to justify Emma's abandonment now seemed not just cruel, but profoundly short-sighted. Emma's presence in the neighborhood was a daily reminder of the choice they had made and the daughter they had underestimated. She was professional and cordial when their paths crossed, but there was a distance that spoke volumes about the cost of their decision. The final revelation came when Emma announced her intention to establish a scholarship fund for disadvantaged young people in the community. The fund would provide not just financial support, but mentorship and guidance for those who, like her, had been written off by others. The announcement was covered in the local newspaper, and the Morrison family found themselves reading about their estranged daughter's philanthropic efforts over their morning coffee. Emma Morrison had not just survived being abandoned by her family, she had thrived. She had taken the pain of rejection and transformed it into fuel for success. She had proven that true strength wasn't inherited or gifted, but forged in the crucible of adversity. Standing in her new home, looking out at the house where she had once lived as an unwanted shadow, Emma felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in her success, certainly, but also a profound sadness for the family that had never recognized her worth until it was too late to repair the damage. They had done. She had come back stronger than ever, not for revenge, but for vindication. She had proven that they had been wrong about everything, about her potential, about her worth, about what it meant to be strong. And in doing so, she had also proven something equally important to herself, that she didn't need their approval or their love to build a meaningful life. The scared, abandoned teenager was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned that the only validation that truly mattered was the kind that came from within. Emma Morrison had not just survived her family's abandonment, she had transformed it into the foundation of a life more successful and fulfilling than any they had imagined possible. The story of the Morrison family would forever be marked by the day they chose to invest in one daughter's potential while discarding the other. But Emma's story, the real story, was just beginning.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.